Every year, the relentless, insatiable Roman military machine consumed an unimaginable, nearly terrifying amount of wealth. This was not a localized expense. It was a continental drain. Facing the eternal shadows and dense primordial forests of Germania, the bone-chilling freezing rain and treacherous bogs of Britannia, and the scorching, sun-bleached deserts of the East, hundreds of thousands of professional Roman legionaries marched, fought, and built fortifications. They did not just defend borders, they actively pushed them. But these men did not march purely for glory or the abstract concept of SPQR. They were professionals, and they fought for coin. Their reality was paid in silver denarii and gold aurae. This vast, permanent standing army required consistent jalovania, stipendium, occasional bonuses, donativa, that could equal years of pay, and essential retirement packages, premia missio, often consisting of a massive cash lump sum or prime farmland. To pay this permanent, armed, and heavily financed populace, the Roman Empire demanded gold on a scale previously unseen and unthinkable in all of human history. The monetary demand was immediate, massive, and constant. The empire knew exactly where this immense wealth lay hidden. Deep within the rugged, towering, and seemingly indomitable mountain ranges of Hispania Superior, modern-day northern Spain, veins of chemically pure, high-grade gold were trapped. This was not loose dust in a riverbed. It was bound inside millions upon millions of tons of solid silicate conglomerate and unbreakable, massive granite rock formations. Nature had placed it there in an impenetrable, ancient geological vault. For any other civilization in the ancient world, extracting this bound wealth meant only one thing: decades, perhaps centuries, of slow, agonizing, and incredibly inefficient labor. It would mean generations of men with tiny, fragile iron picks, slowly scratching at the indomitable surface of the stone, dying in the perpetual, absolute darkness of shallow shafts, often sacrificing months of labor simply to extract a few ounces of gold dust a day. The mountains, in their overwhelming scale, would win. But the Roman engineers did not possess decades, and they certainly did not believe in negotiating or compromising with nature. Negotiation was a diplomatic tool. For Roman engineers, terrain was either useful or it was a challenge waiting for a heavy iron hammer. They were the masters of practical engineering on an industrial, militaristic scale. They looked at a mountain standing hundreds of meters tall, a natural monolith that had stood silently for millions of years, and they collectively decided that it was simply in their way. They decided to do something that, to the rest of the world, would have seemed like absolute, terrifying madness. They did not just dig the mountain in search of pockets. They chose to erase the mountain entirely from the face of the earth. They invented a technique of industrial mining that was so violent, so profoundly destructive, and is so frighteningly, calculatedly lethal that the contemporary ancient historian and naturalist Pliny the Elder, who served as a procurator in the very region and witnessed the operation, wrote with uncharacteristic shock. He recorded that this method of bringing down mountains was far more dangerous, far more deadly than the highest risk deep-sea pearl diving. This was not a localized excavation. It was a terraforming project designed by military minds. The Romans called it Ruina Montium, the bringing down of the mountains. And to understand how a classical civilization, operating without the assistance of chemical explosives, without dynamite, and without the aid of modern mechanical machinery, could take a massive, solid geological formation and shatter it into dust in a single, terrifying moment. We need to examine the weapon they chose. This weapon was simple, accessible, and limitless. They did not use fire as their primary force. They did not rely on battering rams or specialized machinery to crack the granite. They used water. But for simple, flowing water to become a weapon capable of shattering millions of tons of granite, the Roman military engineers had to transform it from a fluid into a concentrated, unstoppably violent mechanical force. They had to construct, from raw timber and earth, a hydraulic press the size of a city. They had to build a machine of pure physics. The planned destruction of the mountain did not begin at the mountain itself. That was merely the target. The logistics, the true core of the hydraulic war, began dozens of kilometers away, high up in the neighboring snow-capped peaks. Long before a single piece of gold ore was identified, Roman surveyors, the libratores, walked the rugged, unforgiving landscape. They carried heavy, precise wooden instruments, the groma for right angles and alignment, and the corabates, a primitive but incredibly precise water level used to measure perfect, microscopic, descending gradients across the complex, chaotic terrain. They were seeking slopes of mere fractions of a percent, requiring thousands of man-hours to align over vast distances. Once the route was charted, the specialized legionaries, immunes, and thousands upon thousands of expendable slaves arrived. They came equipped with heavy iron felling axes and the defining multi-tool of the Roman engineer, the dalabra, a heavy pickaxe on one side, an axe on the other, designed for the rapid demolition of both rock and massive ancient timber. First, they clear-cut vast swathes of ancient Spanish forest, providing the raw material to fuel the primary assault on the rock and provide a platform for construction. Where the granite cliffs of the neighboring ranges were too hard for even iron picks, the Romans deployed a secondary weapon of brutal simplicity, the ancient technique of fire setting. Slaves would pile immense piles of dry oak directly against the solid granite cliff face. They let the stone burn until it glowed a dull, angry, incandescent orange in the twilight. Then, men stepped forward with heavy, water-soaked leather buckets and threw freezing mountain water and harsh, acidic vinegar directly onto the boiling, glowing stone. The resulting sudden, violent thermal shock was devastating to the integrity of the rock. The stone literally shrieked. It cracked with the explosive, deafening sound of a cannon shot, violently fracturing into jagged, smoking pieces and sending thick, dynamic clouds of choking white steam and gray dust into the cold, thin mountain air. Pliny notes that this method alone was capable of clearing thousands of tons of rock from the cliff face. Through these endless, stone-lined channels, stretching for over 100 kilometers, the vast descending aqueduct system, millions upon millions of gallons of heavy, icy mountain water began to flow in a constant, controlled stream. It was directed day and night to the very summit plateau of the target gold-bearing mountain itself. Here, at the absolute peak, the Romans dug the piscinae, gigantic holding reservoirs the size of modern lakes. First, they clear-cut the entire plateau. Then they brought up massive amounts of heavy clay, pounding it perfectly flat and deep with specialized wooden mallets for weeks, ensuring the entire floor of the future lake was perfectly sealed. Not a single drop could be lost to infiltration. The aqueduct poured into these newly sealed basins for weeks, forming vast, dark, deep, and unnaturally still lakes suspended hundreds of meters in the sky, a ticking clock of potential energy. At the very base of these massive reservoirs were the central controls of this hydraulic engine, the massive oak sluice gates. They were composed of thick oak timbers the size of ships' masts, bound with heavy, hand-hammered iron brackets. These gates were held back by thick, tensioned ropes of twisted, oil-soaked hemp, coiled around massive windlasses. Behind those heavy wooden gates waited millions of tons of quiet, extremely heavy water, now energized with terrifying potential energy. While the reservoirs filled under the Mediterranean sun above, a much darker, intensely claustrophobic operation was happening deep within the mountain's solid heart. Roman miners, cuniculari, were sent into the absolute darkness of the solid granite. They began carving a vast, terrifying labyrinth of incredibly narrow tunnels, which they called cuniculi, the underground passages. These were not wide mining shafts designed for extracted ore. They were blind galleries, vertical drop shafts, and intricate dead ends, barely wide enough for a man's shoulders to squeeze through while carrying tools. The darkness inside was absolute, heavy, and total. The only illumination came from hundreds of small, flickering terracotta oil lamps placed in shallow niches carved directly into the dark, damp rock walls. The air was visibly thick, suffocating, perpetually filled with the choking dust of broken granite, the smell of sweat and blood, and the heavy, greasy black smoke of burning olive oil from the lamps. The men worked in near total silence, communicating only when essential. The only sound was the rhythmic, muffled, hypnotic thud of iron picks biting into the dense conglomerate. The key to Ruina Montium was not just digging, it was the precision of a structural collapse. The Roman engineers, utilizing mathematical principles derived from arch construction, calculations Pliny confirms, mathematically calculated the precise location of the mountain's load-bearing pillars. In specific stone arches and essential support columns, they weakened the structure, leaving the entire unimaginable, strategically thinned stone columns. The once indomitable mountain was now a hollow shell. It was a vast, mathematical trap waiting to be sprung. It was now a hollow bomb. When the entire intricate tunnel network was complete, the signal was given across the peaks. The evacuation of the target mountain was swift and absolute. Every miner, every legionary, every oil lamp, and every tool was meticulously accounted for and pulled out. The deep, dark, intricately designed cuniculi were left completely and unnaturally empty, echoing only with the faint sound of settling dust. Above, at the massive brimming reservoirs, the legionaries and guards stood ready. The cold, high-altitude wind howled aggressively across the high peaks, rippling the placid, deep surface of the dark, suspended lakes. Roman officers, their silhouetted arms raised high against the stormy sky, raised their other hand. They looked down at the vast, silent monolith of the mountain below them. There were no speeches, no dramatic battle cries. There was only the sharp, harsh, synchronized sound of heavy iron axes simultaneously striking the thick, highly tensioned hemp ropes. With a deafening, heavy wooden crack, the massive oak gates simultaneously released. They swung open under the pressure of millions of tons of water, and the unnatural, suspended lakes were unleashed. A terrifying, unstoppable wall of cold, heavy water surged forward simultaneously, a flash flood born of calculation. The sound of the water entering the main shafts was a deep, guttural roar that Pliny described as unnatural, a thing of dread. As the massive wall of water slammed into the narrow, blind galleries and dead-end tunnels deep inside the mountain's heart, it pushed all the air ahead of it. With no available exit, the air inside the mountain was compressed at a terrifying speed. The pressure building inside the solid granite was unimaginable. Exceeding the tensile strength of the stone itself, the mountain groaned. A low-frequency vibration felt through Roman boots kilometers away. It tore the mountain apart from the inside out. The stone pillars left by the miners snapped simultaneously with an apocalyptic crack that echoed across the valley, louder than any thunder. The ground shuddered, a localized earthquake of human engineering. The entire face of the massive gold-bearing mountain detached, a perfect architectural collapse falling inward and outward in slow motion. A colossal, thick cloud of deep gray and red stone dust exploded hundreds of meters into the cold sky, completely blotting out the setting sun. The geography itself was erased. When the dust finally settled, only a massive, scarred crater of pulverized granite rubble remained. The mountain was gone. The gold was still trapped in this crushed rock. Roman engineers released secondary, controlled floods from the remaining reservoirs on the peaks. This muddy water washed over the rubble for weeks, carrying the heavy gold particles down engineered slopes into the primary valleys. At the bottom, the Romans constructed the agagi, massive stepped wooden washing channels, heavily lined with rough, thorny, densely woven mountain heather shrubs, Ulica. As the muddy water rushed down, the heavy gold particles sank immediately, caught and trapped by the millions of tiny, sharp thorns of the heather. When complete, the mud-caked heather shrubs were carefully pulled from the wooden frames by hand, dried under the hot Spanish sun, and set on fire in massive heaps. The heather burned quickly into fine white ash. Legionaries then stood, waist-deep, in cold, clear mountain streams, swirling this ash in shallow wooden pans. The ash washed away, leaving only the brilliant, heavy, raw gold dust resting at the bottom. The industrial war had ended. This raw gold was carried to the massive stone furnaces. Deep in the night, the glowing white-hot crucibles melted the dust, fed by leather bellows. The blinding molten gold was poured into rectangular molds. As it cooled from glowing orange to dull yellow, a Roman officer took a heavy iron stamp and delivered one sharp hammer blow, driving the SPQR seal deep into the soft ingot. The stamped ingots were locked in reinforced chests, loaded onto heavy ox carts, and sent rolling down the perfectly straight paved Roman roads at sunset to pay the legions. To feed Rome, a mountain had to die. Want to know how a single Roman legion built and destroyed a massive wooden bridge across the deadliest river in Europe in 10 days just to prove a point? Subscribe to the channel. We will dive deeper into the darkest, most brilliant secrets of the Roman Empire.